Welcome, everyone.
Hey there. Good morning.
Hey, morning.
Good morning.
Evening to you, Magnus.
With my audio.
It's like we're having slight audio delay.
You can all hear me, right?
Oh, yeah, I can hear you perfectly.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, maybe CK, you can do introductions.
Yeah,
of people.
absolutely.
And I'll log off and log on again because something just happened with my setup.
Sure. So I'll lead off with myself. Christian Cabridge, VP of Sales here at Sanity. Really excited to talk about this topic with one customer and then someone who is an expert in the space. So I'll start with you, Scott, who is part of AT&T and was originally one of our main advocates in terms of bringing on Sanity to AT&T. So I'll let you introduce yourself, Scott.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Scott Gentz, Director of Technology for our AT&T strategic platforms. And I work closely across our consumer mass market teams, work with our UI and content strategy for all our customer facing and agent and channel facing applications. So great to be here and excited to talk about this topic with you all.
Thanks, Scott. Anuj, I will let you take away. Go ahead and introduce yourself from Toronto.
Thank you very much. My name is Anuj Rastogi. I am VP of Business Development at Wrangle. Wrangle is a Toronto-based digital product consultancy. We've been in business since 2013 and helping a lot of organizations navigate the complexity of evolving and transforming in the digital era. There's a few key areas of focus for us. Obviously, customer experience and Composable is at the center of much of that. However, at the end of the day, we're really focused on building the capability for scaled engineering across our clients. Being able to not just build something great once, but having the anatomy to build that over and over and evolve it and scale it as the business evolves and as customers change. I've been in this business for about 18 years. I've been around a number of different agencies and really found a home here in terms of how we're approaching solving some challenging opportunities for our clients.
No,
and
such
thank
a
you,
great
Magnus
segue.
and team, for having me here.
Thank you for joining.
Thank you. Yeah. Great segue. Magnus, I'll let you take it away with your intro.
Okay. Excellent. I'm Magnus Hillestad. So I'm CEO and co-founder of Sanity. Been working a lot on the Composable era lately, and had good conversations with Scott and Anuj and you, CK, and wanted us to offer that to a wider audience and see how it's interesting. Did you introduce yourself also, CK?
Yes.
Okay, good. Sorry for having technical issues. That was not great. But yeah, so to set the scene, why do we do this? We spent a lot of time at Sanity lately trying to figure out and start putting some words about what's going on. Because we all been, over the last years, varying degree for various companies, been seeing this change that is that is ongoing with digital. There's a lot of talk about headless in our industry, which kind of makes sense, but then again, no, don't. I think there's been a lot of development that definitely matters for the business that has been very much spoken about as technological changes. And we believe that it's important to try to lift the perspective on how are we changing businesses, and how should we read what's going on and changing? How can we put it into context? How can we create a vocabulary between us that makes it easier for us to understand what we're doing, kind of initiative, best practices, maturity levels, organizational changes, and those sort of things. I guess what we're doing today is kind of an experiment. We're going to talk a little bit about the keynote that I had a week ago or 2 weeks ago. And maybe this is the first of many. It's definitely the first of many times we at Sanity are going to talk about it. So without further ado, let's take a look at some of the things that I presented, and then see how we reason about it across different sites here. Courtney, if we could get the slides and bring it to the eras. The whole logic about content in the composable era, or if we go to the next slide and look about the composable era, it kind of isn't about content. It definitely isn't about CMSs, but it's about digital transformation, digital business development. And to recap, for those of you who haven't seen the keynote, my point on this slide, which is the core message, I think, in my presentation, is that we came from a situation in the web era where the web was new. It was starting to take off. Everybody understood there was something. The kind of communication was simple. It was a communication format in terms of marketing more than anything. And the way we worked about it was text and images, funky fonts and colors and all that. It was fun time. Some of that coming back again, but that's more like a design question, I guess. And it was static content inside HTML, and we had the webmasters. People started dabbling. Some built businesses on it, but it was the start of digital experience. It was also the start of digital. Then, in many ways, then we moved into the omnichannel era. And what changed is that you started to put more of your business resources into this. You started having better technologies, both channel technologies in hardware and software, but also software technologies in terms of getting out CMSs, monoliths, kind of came some years before that, really started to blossom. You still had static content, it was still text and images, but it was inside these better ways of dealing with it. And you started putting these layers of business outside of your old business. I remember back then, 2010, I was in private equity. We just bought a sporting goods retailer, and we had about 10 stores at that time, and we're expanding massively. This is XXL, currently one of our customers, expanded rapidly. But we had like these 10 stores, and we had one store that we called the e-commerce store. And it was like a tenth of the business. And it was like another channel instead of having a store in Oslo or Stockholm. And I think the enabling of transactions is what I call the omnichannel era. We started talking omnichannels. We started talking like web and other ways of surfacing it, but it was still this layer outside. And I think that's where most businesses are today. I think many talk about omnichannel as a positive word. I'm making the case here omnichannel is the past, not the future, because omnichannel is about the channel. It's about the experience of, hey, we need to have an app or we need to have a website. And it's still very much static content. It is not lifting the experience. It's not focusing on the experience. It's not focusing on content as a dynamic asset to drive your whole business. It's, again, the thin layer outside. What is changing, in my view, and this is the point I make, I'm going to round it off by this, is that you're entering a composable era where your whole business is turning digital. Some started some years before, some haven't started and would start into it. But 2020s is for us going to be the composable era where all of your business needs to become digital. And the 3 points, the way I explained them, was remarkable experiences. Doesn't mean fantastic design. It could be. By the way, design is how it works, not how it looks. But it doesn't mean like amazing website. It could mean Amazon, which was the example I made, but it means that something that is context related and is person specific so that it treats the experience you want to have with the brand you're dealing with. And it'd be a ton more channels, but it's not about the channel, it's about the experience. And you're putting a lot more flows out there. It's not just marketing or e-commerce, it's your core customer handling flows. It's the product. And the second point is that in such a world, content becomes even more important. You get this content centricity. Content is the brand. If you don't invest in the way you're able to scale your content part of your business, then you're going to fall behind competitors. And the third is kind of where we stole the name from in the composable era, is what Gartner has been starting talking about. Some years ago, started talking about composable business architecture, which, by the way, is not only the architecture in terms of software, but it's also the architecture in terms of the organization. And it's about creating the smaller components of business that you could change and reuse. This doesn't mean microservices as such. Microservices is, of course, one way of doing that, and it's a buzzword. But APIs and services that speak together is the way to do it. In the same way, you have to think about that in your organizational work. And yes, it means more microservices, but the point isn't that. The point is that you think about how you make the different parts of your infrastructure and your organization, so that you can reshape it, so that you can iterate. And more than anything, I think the composable era is the time where everyone starts thinking as a software company. You're not doing an implementation and then you're done. You're building this. You're investing in building digital. That was the claim I made. Now let's take a round and start with Scott and then Anuj in here. How do you think about that? Is this what you're feeling? Does this explain it? Why now, and how do you think about it?
Yeah, I think you're spot on with the evolution, Magnus. I think we've gone from we've seen in the business a move from these static, manually curated experiences to a desire to have these contextual, personalized, relevant experiences for our customers, regardless of where they're at in the channels. The channels will always be there. There will always be subtle nuances to what we do for our customers in those channels. But I think there's a move now to where we want to bring a relevant customer experience to that customer wherever they're at, right? Whether they're shopping online, they come to the store to pick up a device or a product, right? It should be a very fluid experience for our customers. And in order to do that, to your point, we have to move away from, these monolithic, architectures and business architectures and move towards a more composable architecture and thinking around the business too. And that's a good call out, right? Because it's not just the technology. The technology is the enabler, right? But there's also going to be a shift in the way that the businesses and the organizations have to think about how they're composing these experiences and how they're interacting with the customers. And that's going to be a big part of this evolution going forward.
Now, I'm of course, thank you. And I'm of course biased because I've known you at AT&T, and everybody on this call knows that AT&T is one of our customers. It is a good fit because you think this way. What are some of the do you have some examples of changes that we say, we used to do this was omni-channel think, now we're doing this is more composable thinking at AT&T?
Yeah, I think a really good example are our next best action offers that we are looking at now. Like in the past, we were looking at from a business perspective, we're thinking about offers in terms of what's happening in a specific channel. And now we're looking at the entire customer journey. And we're looking for ways that we can make those offers consistent to that customer wherever they're at. So make sure that that what they're seeing in one channel is very consistent with what they may be being seen in another channel. We have customers that do a lot of product research and do a lot of comparison shopping online, and then come into our stores and want to interact with our kiosk, or we have a lot of self-servicing applications out in our third-party retailers. And we want to make sure that as they pick up that journey, that what they're seeing is relevant and consistent with what they've seen before. So I think it changes how we're thinking about how we design our experiences and how we structure our content. And we're getting away from, there will always be, obviously channel specific, but we're getting away from looking at things in just these siloed perspectives.
Thank you. That's a good example. How about you, Anuj?
I think your summary of the timeline, the evolution is quite apt. I think it's a good synopsis of what we've seen happen. What's interesting with technology, and it's easy to lose sight of this, new customer experiences actually emerge out of new possibilities created by some innovation in technology. But what we don't necessarily control is how people will end up using it, and then what technological innovation will happen to respond to it. So in the case of omnichannel, I think my perspective on this is I think you're right. It was truly seen as another channel in the world of marketing. There's digital, there's print, there's TV. In the world of retail, you might have had your online, then your distributors, and then your retail stores. And so what happened is, as these new channels became available, customers interacted with those channels. But then I think something happened naturally and organically is customers started interacting across channels. Now, all of a sudden, an experience that you had in store, because the price that you saw in store is different than what you're seeing online, is creating a little bit of dissonance, for example, in that scenario. So now it creates the need for the business to have a more complete picture of what the business is doing that's reflected across channels, because customers are actually moving across that. And I think what's happened is that push and pull is what's been driving innovation. So when we're thinking about the customer experience, we're often thinking about how do we orchestrate that experience in a way that is focused on the user, regardless of where they are in their journey and moving across those different channels, if you will. So a digitally enabled business might actually have an experience layer that is a website or a mobile app, or it actually might be a customer service agent who is drawing on a whole bunch of intel and data and perhaps rebuttals that they're getting from a repository of internal content knowledge to handle a given situation with a customer. That's still a digitally enabled business, even if the experience there in that case is a human.
That's a great example. We actually see a lot of more of those kind of situations that isn't necessarily driving a website, and often maybe we could have CK's perspective on this. We often can see a significant difference when people come to us and we feel they're thinking it's more in the omnichannel era versus a composable era. Why don't you share some of that, CK?
Yeah, I think, and it goes back to what you mentioned earlier, Magnus, sort of the definition of a remarkable experience. When we have clients that come to us and have defined that or thought about it or have a sense of what their customers' expectations are, it becomes clear how important Composable is. It becomes clear the kind of how they need to work with content and what content needs to be. They have a completely different definition of content than those that are sort of like, I'm with a marketing team, we want to improve our website. We really don't know what that means, but we it's such a different definition. So I think what you just described, Anuj, in that content goes all the way into that agent experience or a human interaction, is such a key differentiator. When companies come to us with sort of that already mapped out, it's such a difference maker in terms of the effect they have on content. And Scott, you're a great example of this with AT&T.
Yeah, I think to a degree, there's a little bit of a framing or paradigm shift here in terms of what an organization thinks content really is, right?
Yeah.
Content might be a specific way of framing a response to a question in an FAQ. It could be ad copy, but it could also just be the insight that you got from a top performing, maybe sales rep on the floor of a business, right? Who's been able to interact with customers and address his questions. And if you could only share that information with the rest of the organization, it would probably inform product teams and whatnot. Once you kind of, I think, reframe your relationship with content and you unshackle it, that's actually where businesses that are able to deliver, that exceptional experience. No, I don't even want to say omnichannel anymore. Like wherever the customer is,
Exactly.
That's the ones those are the organizations that will win.
And that's a great way of put it. And I think a great segue into into so many things I wanted. Let's go down the path of content, because you pick up there, like, change how you think about what content is. How about you all at AT&T, Scott? How have your view of content shifted? How are you thinking about content now?
Yeah, I mean, just to touch on the earlier point, I think Anuj made about, the technology pivots have allowed us to rethink about how we're interacting with content. A good example of that, with our AI chatbots that we're using for our customer support, we've re-examined how we're introducing content into those conversational AI interactions with our customers. So now when we're creating content in the channels, it's not only looking at as copy and maybe typical online digital content. We're also looking at it in this context of one of our chatbots having a interaction with our customer around a product or a support issue. So we're able to look at content and think about how we want to structure it to fit those new use cases. So we're becoming more efficient. We're looking at ways to explore it, and again, just trying to make these experiences very consistent for our customer, and exploring different uses for that content. And to Anuj's point, the customer is really driving how that evolves, right? We can go down a certain path, but their interaction with our brand within our products and our sites are going to drive how that evolves over time.
Yeah, if I may, just to dwell on that for a moment, Scott, because I think it's a brilliant point. When we think about content, we think about the broadcast of content that the organization shares with the world. But content is also that dialogue, that feedback that's coming back in proactively or reactively from the customer, from the market, which then informs how the business goes about operating. And even that content that's being sort of sourced or unsolicited coming back from customers is still a value. Like, that needs to permeate the organization if it's going to continue to evolve.
If you think about it, because of that need to continuously interact with our customers, this need to move to a composable era and a composable business architecture and business organization is critical, right? Because as this all evolves, our customers interacting with our sites real time, our different channels, our different devices. It's going to be very important to have that ability to quickly adapt and present content that's relevant to that customer point in time. And it's not quite real time yet, but it's approaching that, right? So as we get that intent, that feedback loop from our customer, to have that ability to flexibly move and adapt to it is critical. So all this evolution is driving to support that. So it's very, very exciting to see.
This is what I often talk about as the metadata that isn't shown, but it kind of surrounds the experience. I think you're making some great points, and it's not possible without treating content as data, because it's all about having it machine readable, and it's abstracting away from the necessarily what is shown to the customer. It's how it's shown in the totality. How about, I also often make the claim that you have to have a source of truth, that content will be equally important as the three sources of truth in a company, being the products, the transactions, and the customers. You should have content in the same way, and then looking at content as data, as reusable part of it. How do you both think about that in the composable era? Are you Anuj seeing that with your customers, that this is an important part of being successful in the composable era? Are you doing it, Scott, or is it more about this doing metadata and real-time flows for your perspective? Yeah, both of you.
I think it's
go ahead, Scott.
I think it's a combination of those things, Magnus. We absolutely have to have a source of truth for our content, just like we do with our data, right? So especially at scale, there's just no way of being able to manage efficiently all our content and optimize the reuse and be able to provide consistent user experiences if we can't manage where content is sourced from and how we manage and manipulate that. I think as technologies evolve, machine learning and automation and the use of metadata will help automate that, so it's not so prescriptive is still today is very somewhat prescriptive, but having that source of truth with content, just like we do with data, is very critical as we evolve.
Yeah, 100% would agree with that. At the end of the day, content can and should be data, and without the appropriate foresight on the organization, the taxonomy of that content, and how the organization can potentially consume it, you quickly get overwhelmed. And so it is really important to think about the metadata around the content, and then this is where I think we're also at that place in our technological life cycle where a combination of the increased computing power that we have available through the cloud, plus machine learning and advancements in AI algorithms, and some fantastic technologies and platforms and tools that are out there. We've got the tooling to be able to do it, but you still have to make decisions on defining what that meaning is for the organization. So that's where that taxonomy and metadata is pretty critical. If something is a customer concern, right? Complaint, for example, and let's just say that was a meta tag living somewhere in the content, like that is important because it can be used in so many different contexts. It can inform product development features and roadmaps. It can inform how you handle follow-up customer service issues. It could mean any number of things. But having that metadata as I think a focal point about the content is something that's easy to ignore, but it's actually pretty mission critical.
Yeah, those are excellent points. I wonder if we want to tune it a little bit over to what does this mean for how you work with it. We speak about we're going to have a lot more content. It acts differently. The content we're talking about, the purpose of how we're going to work with it acts differently. Maybe give it up to you, CK. What do you see? Again, back to your meeting on behalf of us, a lot of innovative companies that think about it. What are some of the traits you start seeing in the organizations? And let's move over to that side of the story.
Yeah, I think, especially from a company standpoint, they're starting to feel the pull where this is starting to become de facto. Consumers have this expectation now of how they interact with you and your brand. And to your point, it doesn't matter about the channel anymore. They expect that there's an expectation to have that experience no matter where they interact with you. And what we're hearing more and more clients is it's less of a push, cutting edge. And now it's more of I need to get into this composable era because everybody else is and my clients expect me to. And there's been a couple of big drivers, some big companies out there that have set this expectation with every consumer out there. And so that's one thing in terms of the drive for a lot of the companies we meet with is we need to move into this area because this is what our consumers, our customers, our clients expect of us.
If someone are watching this and think about how do I get started? Let's talk about what do you have to have in place of teams in order to get moving? What are some of the core components? I had a slide on it. So if Courtney, we jump to the slide about teams, we could talk about Amazon. Is that really a good example? What are other good examples afterwards if we have time? But I made the point here that you need to. I think Anuj and I had a conversation earlier about. There's been so much technical concepts being thrown at people who wants to have this development. And of course, leaders like you, Scott, who are very technical can tackle that. Technical can tackle that.
And technical, yeah.
But there are a lot of people who care about digital, who want to drive digital, but experience a very heavy technical load on trying to understand this, which Anuj, you made the point, isn't necessary. Maybe I'll play the ball to you, Anuj. How do you think about that part?
I think the the cop-out answer is it depends. And I say it depends depending on where the organization is in its sort of digital journey. But let's just, for the sake of the conversation, talk about a large enterprise that might be, fairly old and have a, quite a history, may have a number of legacy systems and established business processes. For large enterprises, and Scott, perhaps you'll know this better than anyone, for large enterprises, there's so much history to untangle from and unpack from as you're moving into an era where you're not responding in 3-week cycles, you're responding in 3 millisecond cycles to an issue that happens with a customer. And in that context, you need to have the technological underpinnings that actually allow you to move fast. But in most cases, what we find is that the technology is actually not the primary barrier there. It's not the tooling, it's not the lack of APIs or micro front ends that's actually the challenge. It's actually a cultural and capability challenge. The organization has been used to certain workflows, a lot of which might be grounded in old world publishing mindsets around, we're going to go through this waterfall process, and at the end of this, we're going to deploy an app and a website, a page, a campaign, what have you. But in reality, that's not the way that humans collaborate most effectively. So we're huge proponents, and we work in a lean, agile fashion. But we also work in a fashion that is about transformation through doing and building capability development. And what you actually need to do to transform an organization is actually transform the way in which people work together. So I think what we often do is start with the end in mind. I think, okay, how is, in your utopian ideal, your North Star, how would you like to operate, right? Like what would great look like? And then we try to deconstruct some of those cultural, technological barriers, those workflow barriers, and then actually try it out, right? Like you can't solve everything overnight, but what you can do is take a subset of a problem, figure out where the barriers are in solving that. Is it the way the teams are structured? Is it the way that they're organized? Is it the lack of tooling that actually enables them? Are there architectural challenges in that stack? Let's figure out what those challenges are, solve for it at a smaller scale, see what we can learn from it, and then roll out over time. And I think that where people get stuck is they find it so hard to move the whole ship all at once, but you actually just need to move one piece of it, right? Learn from it and then move the next piece. And so we're big proponents of just get started somewhere instead of being paralyzed behind sort of indecision.
Yeah, I really liked your comment, Anuj, about focusing on the end goal and working backwards, right? Because a lot of times we have this perspective of how we want to get to a certain point, but we start from what we're doing today, right? And we need to reset how we think and work in this new evolving culture. So, and we've seen examples of this with the introduction and adoption of design systems, right? That's changing the roles and how the various teams work now in this new modernized era where we have UI building blocks that we can bring in and drop into experiences, and how we introduce content and design. And the same thing is true with content, right? So as we start to look at and talk to our marketing teams about how they want to build these, orchestrated customer journeys, we need to think about working backwards. How do we bring in all the teams and how they interact with this experience to build it in a way that's going to be more efficient and leverages and adopts these new capabilities. And if we started with what we're doing today, I think we would fall short of where we want to get to. We're not going to get there perfectly. To your point, we need to start. But I think if as we look at how we build this, and to your point, like it has to be, we have to consider time to market here. We need to be able to move quickly. So I think you're going to see a very big evolution of these traditional roles. And I think you're going to see an introduction and more of, knowledge around things like metadata. And, so you're going to see like traditional roles like data scientists and content managers, merging, right? Because they're going to have that intelligence to know how to structure that metadata and how to use it and collect analytics. You're going to see all the whole ecosystem evolve. So it's but you have to start someplace. And I agree, start with one area of your business and work backwards from where you want to get to. And I think you're going to get there a lot quicker.
Yeah. It's even evolved over the past year. I mean, I think we're starting to see customers we're working with the title of content operations, which is totally new to us. I mean, we didn't hear that 6 months ago. Content analyst, that's a new title that's sort of coming up. And to your point, I think, Scott, that's the evolution, and language is starting to matter because they're starting to understand, okay, this is this certain type of title we've used in another area of the business that should be applied to content. And those are usually our most advanced and most ahead of the curve clients.
I had told myself not to say design system unless I had to, but you opened the floodgate there. Design systems is a central area of focus for us for a number of reasons, but it's largely because design systems actually play a forcing function in transformation for organizations. And when we talk about the type of collaboration, the co-creation that needs to happen, where designers, product, technologists are conspiring to actually co-create something that can evolve quickly, a design system actually starts to systematize that entire process, right? And it creates and instills a level of culture that allows you to keep moving with that. And I think what is exciting, and I love that you brought that up, Scott, like the roles that we have today in organizations and the roles that we'll see 5 years from now in job postings are going to be very different. And you're right to point that out as well, CK, because the moment you realize what's actually driving your business, you start to put a new focus there. And Magnus, you're right to point out the content is that thing, right? Like that is the lifeblood in many cases.
This is super interesting. I think there's so much unexplored around the organizations. But some of the things I've been thinking when you've been talking is that I often say you need to think as a software company. You need to instill product managers. We involve business managers also, because I think somebody needs to bridge the gap between the strategy and the technology, because it's too much burden for non-technical people to understand. It's like, it's the domain of technical people now. But that's a separate one. If you just keep it on this content side, I haven't thought of that before. Content team role is changing. It's become both the way they think about working. It's instead of creating content, it's about administrating. But often content managers have been about administrating content, but then focus on the publishing flow, which is still relevant. But there's something around the composition flow and how do you actually get this how do you make sure you get the right pieces into this multiple, 1,000 landing pages would be a simple example, but how do you organize that flow of data? And then that changes the content manager's role. And I think everyone who have picked up a modern CMS sees that, because it's categorization of data and it's references and it's different, it's automation, especially if you work in sanity. But when you bring up this analytics part, because there is something around that I didn't put on this, and I should have put up, like the probably some years from now, you should have content analytics, whether it's inside the content team or if it's separate. And I think the way you are able to drive that value and link it back to how you structure content is going to be quite driving of the success you'll have for this, especially in the longer haul. I don't want to make this more complex than it is, because I truly believe in just get started, and that's an important part. But I think if you start in the right way of thinking about content value, and it maybe comes down to the content modeling. What is a content model? It has been this field that content model is a lot of specialists that have their own nomenclature, and sometimes I think foreign for some of the non-technical person like me who's not a content domain expert. But there is something here that we need to get the common language, and we need the same way you need the design system. The content model is that system for the business operation. I think so. Maybe this picture is completely wrong, because this picture is like the first start. You should act as a software company. So hire your own developers, get designers, get design systems, hire product managers, give them the tools and the opportunity to iterate, create MVPs and get started, and then have content managers and invest in the content teams. But maybe that's just the first step. And then the next step is going to be a much more complicated content organization.
I'd like to suggest something that might be a bit controversial, but I'll go out here on a limb and say it anyways. When I'm talking about a content management system, I'm talking specifically about the initial kind of traditional CMS where the front end, back end are coupled. But like in the traditional context of CMSs, it's a content management system, but the order of true priority is actually inverted there. It's actually been treated as system managed content. Content was never the hero there, right? There's so many barriers in actually trying to work with your content. And so this move towards headless and then ultimately composable, I think has been the move in the right direction to put content right back in the center. But we're in the era of composable, which I think is why it's exciting is the following. There's a book that I thought was just mind-blowing for me back in 2006 called The Long Tail by Chris Anderson. And long tail essentially just states that the area under the curve in any market is under the long part of the tail is actually greater than the area under the short end, which is why iTunes can sell one song once in 10 years and still make a profit on it, but a retailer can only carry a certain number of SKUs. We're at the point now where you can compose enough experiences that you can start to tackle the long tail of experiences for customers. Because that particular experience where there may be 25% of your customers you're going to find a lot of success with, it might not resonate with the other 75%. But in order to be able to address those other use cases, you need to be able to address them quickly. You need to be able to have the right tooling, technology, team workflows and whatnot to test out an experience, see how it lands, and then iterate on it. And then you need to have the content to be able to satisfy those experiences. That takes a lot of different orchestration. But I think we're finally at the place where we can do that because no two customers actually want to interact with you in exactly the same way. We create these narrow models because that's what we have to work with.
Yeah, I think you're spot on, Anuj. I think we're already seeing, like, even within the last 5 years where, 95% of our experiences were these, static experiences, kind of a one size fits all for all our customers. And now slowly we're seeing, 20%, 80-20% where we're personalizing and we are attacking the long tail, not just from a business perspective, but even performance, right? We have a lot of customers that are on older devices and older browsers, right? So being able to customize and tailor our experience and our content to fit those long tail customers is a very important strategy going forward. But back to the evolving teams and roles. Yes, I completely agree, Magnus. We've only started to touch on where these things are evolving. Content analytics is a very important feedback loop. That's going to be just as important as these real-time signals that we're getting from clickstream data, right? How we're structuring our content, how the customers are interacting with it is very, very crucial. If we can't measure it, we can't manage it. So it's very important that we do those things. So
yeah, and those long tail sort of experiences they're sort of like, I hate to compare it to this, but almost like the undecided vote, right? That 25% you're competing over, they're going to make a decision no matter what. But there is so much opportunity out there that is untapped that I think is a difference maker for companies that can get in there and actually attack it in the right way.
Yep.
I'm totally with you. Not only in terms of the experience for different people, but also to be visible. A key part of the drive for this modern technology is to be visible and to play the SEO game. And I think in that sense also you need to have this broad. You can't just print out 10,000 different landing pages. They have to mean something. They have to be able to rank to some degree for what they're, or rank for the part of the curve that they address. I also love the way you talk about this. CMS. CMS is the best word out there for what we're doing. We're probably known for being very cautious with the headless word because we think it just talks about having an API, and it's kind of the wrong focus. It also doesn't. It doesn't say what you want to say about how you change the way you work. And in the same way, the CMS we spoke about. I remember a long time ago, I was with my co-founders in San Francisco, and we were talking about not only that the system and the management way of this is wrong, but also the content part. Because what we discussed earlier, when we say content in this group, we align on content being much broader. But a lot of people still feel that content, think about something much more narrow when we talk about content.
Mhm.
So the whole term is problematic, but maybe still it's fine to build on it and change that, because I think there's been a lot of other words that have been thrown around this industry around experience cloud and a lot of other things that to some degree has meant that you're coupling a bunch of other services together, which to me is the wrong way to go about this problem. We've seen this change. We of course advocate for the fact that you should have a stack that has to be put together with different parts, and there is a base there of a platform that creates content, but all these other things you should put together, and that's an important part of the composable era. But at the same time, we want to keep down the technical overhead for business managers, and it's they stop when they have to choose between all these 4 different services. And I think a lot of people then goes like, can someone just give me this in a box? And the idea of an old monolithic CMS actually don't sound that bad, because how am I going to choose? How are we gonna, as an industry, you think, how are we going to help people past that? We need more technical complexity and composability, but we need to get business managers like technical to move on that. What do you think?
Curious to hear your perspective on this, Scott. I mean, you're living and breathing this.
Yeah, I think you're right, Magnus. I think headless is now becoming overused in a lot of spaces. Especially, I think headless was a means for us to decouple the layers, to get away from these very headful legacy strategies where, especially in the different UI spaces, a lot of these tools and platforms and companies had a very heavy client-side library approach to injecting their services and features. But I think now that we've made this pivot, just like we've discussed today, it opens up a door for all these new tools and technologies and stacks to work in that space, in the experience space, and leverage all these different now decoupled capabilities, including content. But managing content is only one small aspect of it. How it's used to orchestrate experiences, how it's used to enhance things like SEO and performance, right? And how that, like we talked about with the data and being able to use metadata to drive not just analytics, but also decisioning and things like content generation, right? Because that's coming, where we'll be able to take these content variants and we'll be able to publish all these pieces, and then eventually there'll be supervised and hopefully someday unsupervised models that will drive generating these content variants. So all of that is being enabled by this, but I think it's a very content management system is a very archaic way of looking at where things are evolving.
Could it be that we struggle a bit with this, and that we tend to talk about the technical implementation of what we do because we lack language of what good looks like and how this will impact the business? It kind of goes to content analytics, but that I feel is like a detailed operational thing. But if you just think about the benefit of being in the composable era, like how do you measure success? What do you point to that you did with your business or the outcome of your business, instead of saying, I installed this thing, like I got a new Next.js site with Sanity in the backend, so now I'm good. And everybody knows that you're not good at all just because doing that. It could still be terrible if you do it the wrong way. Is there something here about benefit language? Do you see something here, Anuj?
I absolutely. I think this is partly where there's a strong overlap in design systems. So we stood up and have advised on design systems for some of the largest organizations in the world. And one of the things that I love about working with the team here is that they're constantly pushing to find out, like, are we actually driving impact and value? We have established an open source design system accelerator called Radius. And one of the things that we actually do when we're running design system engagements is using a Radius tracker, which is something that we've used with our clients, actually looking at, for given components, what is the utilization? How many times inside of that repo has that particular component been called across multiple experiences? And this is important because when we're thinking about composable experiences, the constituent elements of that may well be snippets of code that are appearing in different apps and web pages and whatnot. So you want to know how many times some element that you've used to compose an experience has actually been called on. That's giving you a sense of traction, right? Like, are 50% of our experiences powered by this? Is it 10%? Is it 5%? And that becomes just one data point in a broader consideration set. I think like you, Magnus, we don't believe in a monolithic architecture. In the same way that if you were investing your money, most wise people would tell you, don't put all your money in any one basket. Putting all of your money in the monolith actually leaves you open to all of the risks that are tied to it. So we're big proponents of modular architectures where you're relying on the best of breed systems and platforms and tools and APIs. But at the end of the day, you should be orchestrating the experience layer. And that should be the thing that you have the most control of. And that should never come down like a house of cards because you decide to swap out any one of those systems. So in order to do that, I think you're right. We need to have a better language that's less intimidating for non-technologists. But I will say, like, I think we oftentimes forget, like, client organizations, large enterprise, startup, scale-ups, there's actually an incredibly new degree of savvy. People are actually very intelligent and sharp and able to understand these concepts if we just give a little bit of time to educating. And I think that there's a little bit of arrogance that the industry sometimes needs to get over, that you're not technical enough, so you won't understand this. Well, maybe you're actually just not speaking clearly. Maybe your point actually isn't obvious. So I think we need to come back, to the problem with a sense of humility. And there's a lot that we can learn. I mean, honestly, I would say, like, hats off to you, Scott, and your team. Like, inside an organization as complex as AT&T, to have the bravery to do what you do. It's easy for me to say these things from the outside, but you're actually living it. And I think we have a lot to learn from each other on that. And this language I think it should be co-created. It's not just broadcasting it to anyone. Like, we need to shape this together.
I love that.
Yeah, that's awesome, Anuj. I think you're spot on there. With that observation, there is a new language. There's a new way of interoperating, and it should be driven by the industry. And it's not just the content; it's all the pieces that are in the ecosystem. Right, all the tools are going to be impacted by this pivot. We're seeing it with tools like not just design, but even A/B testing. Right, is now being reinvented as an example, right? So we all need to come together. There's too much disparity and overlap. We see that, I think MarTech and the marketing folks have one perspective of it. Product teams have another perspective of it. There's so many different concepts and platforms that are really doing the same thing. So how do we coalesce all these things and drive things forward? That's going to be a real interesting challenge.
I think it's interesting that you're just dropping little gems here, perhaps like subconsciously without realizing it. I mean, you just mentioned A/B testing. When we're thinking about design systems or solving for some of these challenges, one of the key things that comes up with clients is they expend so much time and effort and energy and budget on just keeping the day-to-day experiences running that they don't have time for the new exciting stuff like personalization, multivariate testing, A/B testing. Now, when we think about that long tail CX possibility in terms of composable experiences, you don't want to just roll out 100,000 new experiences. Ideally, you want to test those experiences. In order to test, you need to be able to compose them quickly. You need to be able to learn from the market, and they need to be able to iterate on them quickly, right? So the fact that you even have some of that foresight already, Scott, I mean, I think is encouraging to a lot of folks that might be feeling this is a daunting problem, right? Like, you have to start somewhere, and it sounds like you've made a lot of ground.
Yeah, I love it.
For sure.
Do you feel that you have some metrics of what good looks like for for the Composable that that are listening can bring with them, Scott, that you're doing now? Or do you feel that is something that this is the right path and you're still looking for that side because it's hard? Measuring success or measuring the change of Composable? What do you?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that we are looking at, right? Time to market is a big one. How can we improve? But not just getting there quickly, but also with quality, right? So, as Anuj pointed out, like as we roll out things, are we able to test them and measure their effectiveness, right? Because it's very easy to convolute our metrics and maybe mistakenly claim, hey, this is working for us and we're seeing this lift here, this conversion numbers here, but is it a true impact or is it a side effect, right? So we have to rethink how we're measuring and monitoring results. I think those are big things that we want to look at. But I also think, to Anuj's earlier point, as we decouple things, as we look at more best in breed solutions, how quickly can we pivot and adapt and integrate new technologies, new stacks? That's going to be another litmus test for are we doing what we're needing to do? So those are all things I think that are evolving. But yeah, I don't think we're 100% there in terms of being able to quantify, are we making great progress? I think there's things that we're starting to look at. I'm sure there's other things that we'll think of, but yeah.
Fantastic. This has been a great conversation. If I took some, I probably didn't get this one totally right, but I tried to take some notes, and we got to look back what we talked about. The Composable era is real. There's a significant change from the omni-channel to the Composable, and it is a lot about the experience, which still is a ton of different channels, but it is how you have that seamless experience with people. And it's a lot driven by content is changing, because content is so many more things. Not only it's a lot more different uses of content. You may not even see it. Digital is not only the website, but it's someone on the customer center looking at content in order to give you a better experience, because all your business is turning digital. But it's also metadata, it's signal, and it needs to be source of truth. It needs to be programmatic. You have to change that way of working. But we're also saying you should start small, because we often talk about this thing. They sound complex. One of the challenges with the previous era was there were a lot of systems that sold you the whole complex thing. We need to get you started with something that is not intimidating and that you can measure. I'll come back to that. Then we talked about the organizations. The organizations are changing a lot. And my picture is probably wrong. It's changing more than that. But it starts by thinking like a software company, getting people together. But then we spoke a lot about talking together, get the same language together inside an organization, so you know what you're doing. Get started, measure the value you want to get out of it. In analytics, content analytics in general, like understanding the numbers around the composable industries is early. We need to work on that language. We had a book recommendation of The Long Tail by Chris Anderson, but making the point that a lot of the value in the composable era is not in the one big traffic driver, but in the long tail of things that touches people with digital. And then we spoke about measuring success, measuring content. It's about being able to orchestrate. It's about finding some numbers that could drive the decision to make the investment. Because if you believe in this is inevitable, you have to go this direction. You have to start somewhere, and there's significant investment you have to make. And maybe the easiest, Scott said, that CK and I see a lot with customers, it typically starts with time to iterate, but then also quality. But actually that you get speed up in the way you work seems to be the one that we heard today and that we heard the most is if you're going to look for one measure, look at your organization's ability to do that. This has been great. It's been fun. We should do this again sometime.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me here.
It's been great.
Thank you so much for joining. Thank you for everyone who's been watching. I think Courtney said at the beginning, I didn't repeat it afterwards, that we could take Q&A. We didn't we didn't get a lot. I hope that is a positive sign that we were engaging instead of the other side. But if you're watching and you want to talk more about this, reach out to us at Sanity. Reach out to Anuj at Wrangle if you want to talk to him. Reaching out to us. Scott is also talking to people looking at deploying Sanity and happy to meet. I know maybe reach out via us so we can filter it, but do that. And this is a start. We're going to talk a lot more about this as the time goes by and shape, and hopefully we're going to look back at this as an early discussion of the composable era, where there were so many things that we didn't know.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Magnus and CK, for leading the charge on the important conversation here.
Yes, great to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you both for joining.
So
All right.
Bye.